Somehow, Board of Finance always gets to officially host this, but we really view this as everybody's meeting, so welcome. We have a few things we need to take care of before we get into the presentation. One, limited microphones tonight, so it does help if you pass the microphone to the speaker, since we're all muffled. All right, good. We have some new people here, but I think it would be helpful for everybody if we just went around the table and said our name and what our role is. That way, we won't call somebody by the wrong name. All right, you want to start, Lisa?
Sure. Lisa Hebner, Vice Chair, Board of Finance.
Linda Schofield, Board of Finance.
Derek Peterson, Board of Finance.
Mike Doyle, Incoming Board of Finance.
Heather Getz, Incoming Board of Selectmen.
Neil Sullivan, Assistant Superintendent for the School District.
Matt Curtis, Superintendent.
Susan Selena, Board of Ed Chair.
Tara Wheeler, Board of Education.
Todd Burek, Board of Education.
Lydia Tadone, Board of Education.
Brian Watson, Board of Education.
Melissa Appleby, Deputy Town Manager. Amy Merriweather, Finance Director.
Maria Capriola, Town Manager.
Sean Askham, Deputy First Selectman.
Eric Wellman, First Selectman.
Amber Abiel, Incoming Board of Selectmen.
Wendy Maxudis, Incoming First Selectman.
Jackie Battis, Outgoing Board of Selectmen.
Kevin Prell, Outgoing Board of Finance.
Art House, Board of Finance.
Chris Peterson, Selectman.
Bert Helfand, Incoming Board of Finance.
Tom?
Tom Tversky, Culture Parks and Recreation Director.
Sue?
Hi, Sue Hamrucklam, the Assistant Superintendent.
All right, Mike.
Mike Long, Simsbury Police Commission.
All right, great. And I'm Rob Pomeroy, outgoing Chairman of the Board of Finance. All right, you want to?
The phone's on, sir?
Oh, and there are, I think, is there anyone on the phone? There was a dial-in for those that might not be able to be here tonight. So please speak up.
Hi, this is Tom Lay, Director of Health Board.
Hey, Tom. That's it.
Is there someone who's going to let people in? Because Jeff Tyndall is landing in Nashville, and we'll call in as soon as he gets
It's open, so.
It'll come through.
It's open?
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Tom must be worn out from the facilities tour. Huh? Yeah, all right.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. Lisa, you want to go?
Yes.
All right.
So I'm going to do something not on the agenda, and first of all is to thank Rob and Kevin for your outstanding service to the town of Simsbury. I think I speak for everyone in this room in saying it's been an honor and a pleasure to serve with you both.
Thank you.
And we'll miss your keen insights and analyses. In your bags, I'm not going to make you open them now because we wrap them really well. You'll find Farney fountain pens, courtesy of Art, who tells us that they are used by diplomats and people in the inn in Washington, D.C. So flown into Simsbury for you both in recognition of your sharp and able, recognition of the sharp and able pen you took to the town's finances. We hope the pen will also be useful to you both as you write your next journey. And you'll also find a Simsbury beer mug, and I'm just going to leave that one where it is. But thank you both, and we do want to recognize your service.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Great, all right. Gotcha. All right, so I'll kick this off and sort of set the stage for what we're going to try to accomplish tonight. The Tri-Board is a very integral part of our budgeting process, sort of the kickoff, although I know a lot of work has been done. Amy, others, lots of people. What's important about the Tri-Board is that we all have the goal of serving our town and coming up with a balanced budget and an efficient way to operate. But we do come at that project from a different perspective. Board of Ed has constituents that are students and teachers and employees that are really about the quality of education for our town and for our kids. Town Selectmen, Board of Selectmen, town services, keeping the town running, everything else that goes on day to day. And the Board of Finance, our job is to be sure that we can afford it that we all represent the taxpayers as we do this, but that we have a budget that maintains a fiscal discipline that we've used throughout the years, high bond rating, and a good, supports the quality of life. So what we're going to do tonight, in the past, we have approached this by having the Board of Finance tell you what your budget had to be, and then listen to the, not screaming, but heated discussion. We're going to do it differently tonight. We have asked each of the other two boards to present your priorities. We're all going to listen to each other's priorities, and we're going to talk about the things that are important to each of those boards. And we'll do the same. The Board of Finance will do the same in terms of the things that we think are important for achieving that consensus budget when we're done. And then we'll talk about where we think that all is today and the work that has to be done between now and when the final budget comes together in January, February, and March. All right? The problem with us giving you guidance, which we've done in the past, is we always had to do it off of imperfect information. We don't have perfect information yet either. But we'll be able to see a relative position of where we are, and then where the areas are that we need to work together to come up with the balanced budget that's good for the town from all perspectives. Perspective of the Board of Ed and the taxpayers and the users of the town services together. All right? So to that end, we're going to start with ask one of the two boards to go first, and coin flip is town. All right?
She's the boss.
I already told us.
Great, excellent.
Always. That's so perpetual.
I'm going to move.
Great, well, good evening, everyone. So we were, thank you. Is this the one?
Yes.
We were asked to, present some of our areas of focus, policy priorities, goals, things of that nature. All of this will go into our budget development. So I'm doing the budget kickoff with our department heads tomorrow. For the town budget development process, it's really, primarily the months of December, January, into early mid-February, where we're doing the bulk of our work on both operating budgets as well as capital budgets. One of the key documents that's very important to us in budget development and our allocation of resources is the Board of Selectmen setting a set of goals and priorities. This is still a relatively new tradition for us that came with the form of government change. That goal-setting session is going to be occurring on December 11th. They will essentially, at that goal-setting session, come up with a set of policy goals and priorities for their 2-year term. So again, we really use that as the base of our framework through budget development, both on operating and capital, again, to really look at resource allocation. The current Board of Selectmen had a number of areas of focus, which you can see, were financial management, maintaining our quality of life here in our community, fostering an engaged and high-quality workforce. Parks and Recreation was definitely an area of focus for us. As you know, we made a huge endeavor with our Parks and Open Space Master Plan in the last 2 years, and then incorporated that into our capital budgeting. Infrastructure, transportation, and economic development were, again, the main areas of focus. For the town manager, thank you. For the town manager, the Board of Selectmen on an annual basis, on a fiscal year basis, they do adopt a set of goals for me that are more organization related, more project in nature. But again, the larger sort of areas of focus there have been HR and labor relations, our financial management, economic development, as well as a whole host of special projects and initiatives. Particularly over the last 2 years, there's been a major focus on open space. So most recently, the Meadowood acquisition and barn restoration, ordinance and policy development, and we've really made substantial progress and are continuing to do so for the upcoming year with the development of our open space and land management practices. A few other work plan documents that are important to us that again come back to resource allocation during the budget process is we have an Economic Development Commission. By ordinance, the Board of Selectmen is required to provide direction to them on an annual basis. They just adopted their most recent work plan for the upcoming year. There were 3 areas of focus, which is marketing. So there's a marketing project currently underway to help promote our community, business outreach, and supporting entrepreneurs. And then our police commission, also under our charter, as well as an ordinance, has a role in the budget process as well. So they have recently met and identified some budget priorities that they have, which again we will work to incorporate through our budget process, which is staffing needs, both sworn and civilian, overtime needs, a number of fleet acquisitions that are quite important to them that impact capital or operating budgets, mobile data terminal and in-car dash camera, as well as, the sidearm replacements. So we are also asked to highlight some of the budget challenges, issues, or opportunities that we see at this point. Again, it's very, very early in our budget development process, but like much of the country, much of the private sector, we in the public sector are also experiencing labor shortages. We are seeing this particularly in our more specialized and technical fields of study. Sometimes we are having to do multiple recruitments in order to find the best or most suitable candidate. Hiring good quality people for part-time positions in this labor market is also challenging. And it's also impacting a number of our contracted work and capital projects because there are often project delays and cost increases as our contractors and vendors are also having a difficult time finding people to perform the work that they were intended to perform for us. We're also experiencing the difficulties related to materials shortages. This is affecting our equipment purchases, our fleet acquisitions, various infrastructure acquisitions. Many of them are being delayed by months and months and months. And it's also caused an increase in some of our capital projects. So you may see as we move forward in budget development, a project that we had a very good capital number for, say, year 2 of the plan, it may be drastically different come this budget year, again, as we're seeing those major cost escalations happening in regards to labor and materials. Another challenge and issue we're facing is we're really seeing this in our day-to-day work, and it's the pandemic's effects on the well-being of our residents and our staff. A good example of this in terms of staffing needs is social work services. So this is something that I am working through with our social services director and our police chief, and we will most likely have a proposal to utilize ARPA funding for social work services. We're seeing our youth services, what's called the Youth Services Bureau within social services. The referrals for our youth and family therapy program have quadrupled. The intensity of the cases that we're seeing at our juvenile review board during the pandemic, it's an incredible difference. So there's definitely a need we're seeing to help provide a higher level of support, again, social work services to the youth within our community. We're also have an interest in utilizing ARPA funding to potentially have a social worker go out in our community. So oftentimes, let's say the police department may get a call for somebody experiencing a mental health crisis, somebody experiencing a substance abuse crisis, somebody who's just experienced domestic violence or family violence. And being able to, after that call for service, when folks are back home, being able to send a social worker to help provide resources, connect people to resources. Again, we're just seeing a need in all of those areas. And again, we really feel that this is the pandemic's effect on the overall well-being of residents. So that is something we will be working through budget development. Again, a priority that's sort of related to various staffing needs that we have is also looking at our ARPA funding, ensuring that we're appropriately using the ARPA funding to aid in pandemic recovery. It's this amazing opportunity in that we have a great deal of federal dollars coming our way, but as we are learning, the uses are quite restrictive, but it's also very important for us to make sure that we're appropriately using those dollars. I'm sure many of you have seen the articles around what's happened to West Haven, so again, it's just very, very important to make sure that we are appropriately using those dollars. Some other budget challenges and issues. We are just now finalizing the town's facilities master plan. I think a wonderful opportunity for synergy on our facilities master plan is that many of you know we were able to use Tecton, which is the same firm that the Board of Ed used. They were wonderful to work with. We were able, in our budget process for the current year, to incorporate some of their findings, but as we are now wrapping up that study, we will continue to refine our capital budgeting and incorporate their work into our larger capital budgeting. Another area of interest is continuing to utilize our capital reserve for routine and ongoing capital needs, particularly some of those smaller dollar value items that would be more CNR in nature. Those are items that we would typically want to pay for in cash and not bond for. Great news to report. Our health insurance fund is stable and in a healthy position. For those of you who have been with us for a few years, you may recall a number of years ago, we had discovered that the health insurance fund was insolvent and had been insolvent for at least 5 years or more. And so we had a lot of ground to cover to get us back into a good and stable position, but we are, which helps take a little bit of budget pressure off of us for the upcoming budget. And like the Board of Finance, administratively, our management team on the town side, as I know as well as the board, we do have an interest in continuing to, further reduce our interest rate assumptions for both our pension funds and our OPEB trust. This is just a snapshot of our fixed cost. Again, this is incredibly high level, also very preliminary. I would say, sometimes we're pretty darn close to this number at the end of budget development. For salaries and benefits, one of the things that you might recall is in the last few years we have had a large number of retirements from long tenured employees. So some of our staff members, who had 25, 30, 35 years of service, hitting retirement age. And what we're seeing in the upcoming budget is an opportunity to finally capture a little bit of those savings. Many of those longer tenured employees were at the maximum of their salary range. Many of their replacements are coming in at the lower end of the salary range. And so that's why, again, our preliminary estimate on salaries and benefits, that number, the increase looks a little low, but it's really, again, due in part to the large number of retirements from long tenured staff that we've had. Right. So that is our high-level overview.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so our turn, I suppose. Right, so we have, so we have started our budgeting process. We usually start in October when Matt begins meeting with building principals and they kind of start to lay that groundwork. We start every process by using our strategic plan, which we do every 5 years. So 2019 was the last time we worked through our goals. So we're about halfway through now. And each time we do this, we do it to ensure that success for every student and give them innovative, dynamic learning experiences. We want to create a compassionate and connected school culture that fosters empathetic, ethical, and a resilient community. We want to have a premier workforce that we're always striving to hire, invest, retain passionate, exceptional staff who contribute to a challenging, innovative, collaborative culture defined by continuous improvement. And we do all of this sustainably and strategically through capital investments for the success for all students with fiscal responsibility and long-term stability. And I think you'll find that evidence through our prior budgets that have all come in right where we've needed them to be. So with that, I'm going to let Matt dive into the details.
Great. And I think of note, and it's kind of stating the obvious, when we created that plan several years ago, we weren't in the midst of a pandemic, right? So everybody's conditions have changed, and we've had to adapt differently and think differently. And I think we're certainly in the midst of that. So I figured we would start with enrollment, because enrollment information for a school system is really the backbone of how we plan, and is a lot of the give and take and understanding we have about how we staff and where we staff. So these are the actual projections. They just came in recently. Neil will do a pretty large-scale presentation to our board mid-December. But this is what we planned our kind of staffing at this point as we move into the budget process on. And you can see overall a slight increase in the district, and you can see the variances across the levels. So at the high school, grades 9 through 12, not a significant decline in enrollment, but a decline as some of those smaller cohorts are making their way through the high school. Middle school, pretty even, and you can see where the increase is taking place in our district, and it's at the elementary level. And we're going to have to continue to keep a really close eye on it. You know, this year's kindergarten class was the largest kindergarten class we had in 15 or so years. So it was the first cohort that came in again over 300, and we had to react to that. We did have to add a few sections that weren't budgeted for. So some of that may have had to do with COVID and people not sending their kids. So we'll have to see what the reality of that and how it plays. Interesting enrollment tidbit today is we get an update every month on new registrations, withdrawals, and what that looks like. Very rarely does our enrollment grow over the course of the year once the year starts. And we're already up over 30 students since September. So we have some wonky things going on that we're going to need to continue to take a look at. And like anything else, the students arrive in the wrong place in the tight classes. So we're managing that right now with the conditions we have. But you can see the 5-year projection, what that looks like, a pretty significant increase of 11% to the overall enrollment. So I know the theme for a lot of years and our ability to kind of be flexible in how we did things was our enrollment went down substantially. We could capture some FTE at the elementary level in particular and reinvest it in other things. Certainly that gets a little more challenging if your enrollment's going up. Same format that the town used and Amy worked us through on the fixed cost side. Our salaries look a little different this year than the towns look. We have a fixed and roll our contractual obligations up. It's an increase of 3%. I think I had that breakout, you know, when we do in the budget presentations. About 2.5 of that is the teacher contract, is the most significant portion of that. Medical insurance, I believe, Amy, this is a 4% placeholder. And certainly that's a lever as we work through and we talk about that internal service fund. We hope to have some flexibility there. You can see some of the other fixed costs, utilities. I know we did that collectively with Tom Roy's guidance, and you know, percentage-wise to the line items, they're pretty significant, even though the dollars aren't huge with the cost of fuel. And I think it's a 7% increase, and electricity was up 5%. So, as you're all aware, you know, things are costing more and costs are increasing, and we have to figure out how to manage that. So, overall, we're looking at fixed costs as we roll into this and just start our planning process at about 3.5. So it is a higher number than we've had in recent years.
Have you taken into account retirements?
That is in that number, yeah. It's a placeholder of 7 retirements.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll break that out as, you know, we get into further presentations and work through, and that number can change too. This is just an interesting look, as I was actually preparing something a couple weeks ago for my staff, and we were talking about costs and enrollment and FTE over time. And it's really a decade snapshot of looking at what happened to our overall enrollment, which did go down significantly, but also taking a look at our special education students and their enrollment, and it's gone up significantly. So we have an inverse trend in the district that we're responding to that doesn't fit the equation of, hey, you went down 20 students, it's an FTE. And why I put that slide here tonight is our needs are similar to the town's needs. You can go ahead to the next slide, in that our students are coming to us in this time frame with different needs. And we really need to be thoughtful about how we structure programs, how we structure services to meet those needs. So a couple of the things we're going to be talking about as we go through the budget process. Number one, at our elementary level, how we structure supports, kind of leadership supports at the building level to get boots closer to the ground. Right now we have administrative positions that are more like I visit this place, you know what I mean? I try to get to 5 locations and manage things. We're looking at maybe taking a shift in a different model to how can we get people closer to the building level, managing some of the PPTs, managing some of the meetings, so that there's not as much pull on our school psychologists who currently do that now, and that would free them up to service families and service students. So these wouldn't be administrative positions, but they would handle administrative work at the building level, closer to where the challenges are. The other piece is it's actually a repeat of what Maria talked about. We're seeing a real increased need for mental health and clinical supports amongst our students across all levels. They're varied needs, but they're across all levels. We're currently in the process of working with our principals and our special education staff to put together data to share, to talk about, that demonstrates this need. But it's a significant difference than we've looked at in the past, and it needs to be addressed. Intervention supports, it's not a mystery that our students do have learning loss and have been away from the routines and what we've done. So how do we structure supports to help our teachers with that, thus helping our students? Because one of the things, and it's obviously all over the media and all over the news, is schools have come back with normalized expectations for everybody, and none of the COVID protocols have changed. So while society by and large has shifted back to doing a lot of things at normal, schools and protocols don't match what's going on outside, and it's definitely creating stressors and shifts and changes for kids and adults to have to adapt to. In terms of recognizing that our base costs are higher, we're fortunate to have some grant funding, and I have a slide in a moment I'll go over on that I think we can offset some of these new costs with. The challenge is being strategic, so we've been through this before, right? We don't create major cliffs in the next couple years. And also some non-lapsing dollars to talk about and look at and think about strategically as well. So those are kind of our offset ideas. And we always look at, as you mentioned, Rob, retirements. When positions come up and we look at refilling, we'll have those discussions. And the labor shortage area has hit us pretty hard as well. Like, you can't find substitute teachers the way we used to. Substitutes, by and large, used to be, the understanding was, hey, there were low-paying situations for retired teachers who came in and wanted to stay active and wanted to do things. That is not the market for substitute teachers anymore. Due to COVID, they're not interested in exposing themselves to that. And also taking a look at how uncompetitive we pay those subs in some of our jobs that are minimum wage jobs. We're having a hard time holding on to people, which is creating disruption in food service and other areas of the organization. So we have a lot of kind of analysis going on behind the scenes and comparative data with other districts to really think at how to address these things, because if you don't have people to cover a classroom, you pull them from somewhere else, and then that area is not getting serviced. It's just not an industry where you have a lot of flexibility when you have those kids sitting in front of you with those needs. So we are, as Maria said, very early on in the process. I just shared this presentation this evening with our administrators and have gotten some input from them, but our meetings with principals don't start yet. To get a little more specific, but these are the things we're talking about and thinking about. And we've had a lot of good conversation early with the teacher union and getting everybody on point that we recognize we have needs and we have to be strategic in what we put forward and how we try to get results. The last is just a quick snapshot at the grants. We've received overall, since the start of the pandemic, about 1.2 million across the various grants. We utilized about 400 of that last year just to close the budget gap. We have some that we are going to allocate this year in the current year for some resources. This is what is not encumbered so far. So when I look at these dollars, these are areas we can go in the planning process and be thoughtful of. It's not an enormous amount of money, but it's significant if you're talking about various positions and various contractual services. So this will be a really important conversation for us all to have moving forward, along, I think, with as we manage our budget this year, what does non-lapsing look like at the end of the year, and what are our targets and goals, right? We all have those different levers we pull on to try to get to the finish line. So that is the quick and dirty of the board and ed.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Rob. Rob, I'm gonna miss you.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, if you could go back a bunch of slides, it's just a clarifier, it's not a challenging question. On the number, so right there, stop, okay.
Yeah.
So simplistically, I've been looking at numbers all day, so my eyes are, 4029 is current, right?
Correct.
And that 4501, that's 8 years ago, 10 years ago. Now
Right.
go back another, your first slide, right there. So then, 5 years from now, we're essentially at 2013. Is that what that number is?
Yeah.
But then, so then you're now one slide forward again. Again one more, and you're highlighting. You know, I'm going to say this indelicately. I have no other way to say it, but it's in my mind. So please, I can get the coaching afterward. The 64 plus that you're highlighting there, from that's built into that 400 and something, some odd increase, okay? So then, are you highlighting that because it's a percentage of what a teacher is allocated for a host of a classroom? Do they need a higher percentage of? You need a higher. They take a higher. Or they can handle lower number of students. Therefore, we need a higher percentage of those potentially representative to in that 400 growth, right? As far as adding FTEs back. Is that correct? Does anybody understand what I'm trying to say?
A special education teacher's caseload is smaller than a regular education teacher's caseload.
Yeah.
So then when you, at a high level, when you take your overall, I mean, if I was just managing high level numbers, when you take your overall enrollment and divide it by the number of staff you have, you're going to come to a per pupil per staff member number, and which is I think how you get at how many the caseload that you can handle. So do you see specifically that you are trending to add into staff specifically in special education? Is that what you're most likely going to highlight going forward?
I think that's what, on the theme page, talking about those two first bullets are related to whether they're special ed students or not, Chris, they're special needs that are different and more intense than your regular ed students.
And when do you think, in that 5-year continuum, when are we going to see the first, I mean, when do you project the first ask? I mean, you have to start programming that out, right? It's not 5 years from now, they're going to have one new special education.
No, I don't think it's like that, Chris, because these students are in regular ed classes as well as special ed teachers. This isn't a play to get more special education teachers. I'm simply trying to show a trend that matches with the needs we currently see, right?
Thank you. And then back to the budget. What I would like to see after the fact, not today.
Chris, you promised this wouldn't be short.
The projected percentage of the total budget, which could you do those numbers, the dollar increase as a percentage increase over last year, like it is in the town one? That's later. That is kind of helpful. Are you following?
Yeah. Okay. Isn't this set up like the town slide, or is it different?
It is.
It's the same thing as the town
total
slide.
budget.
This is something the town has done since I've. Yeah.
It's the same.
Well, this is percentage change over total fiscal year budget. I'm just asking for that looks like it's the total percentage.
Yeah, no,
It's
that-
not labeled right.
Yeah, so it's incorrectly labeled then.
I would agree.
Okay.
Thank you.
Amy's laughing because she knows I'm a stickler for labels.
This is the way we've always done it. It's not a percentage increase year over year of that line.
Of the line item, it's total value to the budget.
It's out of the total increase in the budget, that represents 90%. 90% of the 3.5%. It doesn't. Understand. But 3 years from now, you will.
Thank you.
Salaries are really more like, what, 80% of the total?
Salaries and benefits are about 75% of the whole nut. Yeah.
So 3% is the increase.
No.
3% of that bottom number, 3.5, if you add up all those little components, you get to that bottom number.
The 3%, go back. The 3% is the $2,263,000 divided by the total
Of the budget.
operating budget.
Yes.
So that's the increased dollar, not the dollars that are being spent. The total dollars being spent are 70 million,
74 million, 73 million.
dollars that are up.
In the past, when we get guidance, it's 2% of your overall budget. So this aligns with that thinking.
And it's
But the
labeled incorrectly.
I think it is labeled correctly.
Well, we can work on that later.
We're not going to argue about that.
Oh,
Not
we are.
tonight. Not tonight, we're not. Maybe you guys can argue about that tomorrow.
I think it's labeled.
All right.
It's fine.
Any other questions?
I don't got email.
All right, and now the part you've been waiting for.
I like the label.
Oh, I'm sorry, I do have a couple questions, but they aren't on these slides. You sent us other slides.
I did. I sent just background materials because somebody said you were interested in enrollment information.
And I had questions about that. Do you want me to hold off on those?
Why don't we do our presentation, and then we can come back? Okay? I think that. We got a stiff neck to us.
Sent out with the rest of the materials?
So a lot of this is motherhood and apple pie, and you've heard it many times, but it's worth repeating most of it. So, first of all, it's obvious that the budget has to be balanced. Municipality, we have to do that. We want to balance needs and wants against affordability. We actually have policies for the Board of Finance, and also standards that we rely on and need to meet, all with the goal of keeping our credit rating and maintaining that strong financial position. We want to fund the pension, the OPEB annual requirements. It's been a topic of discussion for several years. We want to promote efficiencies and transparency in communication, and then public input and participation, and then the use of our strategic use of our capital reserve. Capital reserve is just what it says. We put money in, and then when we need it, we use it. Take it out. So, no surprise, the way we fund this operation is from taxes, almost exclusively. We have some outside revenues, we have some grants, and savings. And then for large capital projects primarily, we also do borrowing. And the more efficiently we borrow, the easier that gets to be. On tax revenue. So all of us, I think, when we think about the expenses that we want to incur, put into the budget, are they affordable? Long-term obligations. It's not just this year's allocation for pensions and OPEBs. We have a roughly $100 million future obligation for the pensions that have worked for the town. But we pay that back about $4 million a year. But we want to be sure we keep up with that pace. And we want to have adequate reserves for when things happen. Wasn't that long ago we had the famous October 6th. And then ultimately, the mill rate needs to be affordable, and that is something we can discuss, but it has to be comparable to competing towns and what our citizens can pay for the services that we provide. We have to be aware of their individual and collective financial position. So the mill rate is applied against residential, commercial properties, automobiles. We have to take into account these other things that our taxpayers have to deal with. Consumer price index, changes in Social Security for those on fixed income, impact of the economy on unemployment, and anything that we provide in the form of maintenance that takes away from the total revenue. So I mentioned already long-term obligations. We have about $41 million of debt today. We have bonding still to do for the new project, Ladder Lane. Substantial amount will come on in the next couple of years. We have other capital expenditures that are in our CIP, and we will need to fund those, again, probably debt service then, because we can borrow for 5, 10, 15 years, depending on the use of the project, has to be repaid. It doesn't add up, and it creates a ramp of how much we have outstanding and how much the debt service is. And that's something we need to be very, very aware of. Although the budgeting process itself is very focused on 1 year's operating budget, we can't lose sight of this very important long-term obligation. And so there'll be a lot of discussions about that during the budget process. One of the things that we have been talking about for the last 4 or 5 years, actually, is getting this interest rate assumption for the pensions. So you don't keep up if you don't have, if you just hope and wish that the money that we have set aside grows at a rate that is unrealistic. So we've been getting guidance from our advisors to get down first to 6.5. That's what we were last year. That was our target. The target's been reduced to 6.25 this year. So that'll be one of the things that we're going to be asking that you prepare a budget based on 6.25 and see where we end up.
Is that a firm number, or is that something that could change in a year's time? Is that?
It does go up and down. I mean, the guidance has been progressively down over the last 4 or 5 years. We were at 7 just 2 years ago, and now they adjusted it down again to 6.25. It could go back up sometime, but something's going to happen next year.
Okay.
Right. To the extent that you don't go and you don't use that lower rate, then you are creating the opportunity for us to dig up deeper and deeper hole and get into the same kind of trouble that a lot of local businesses and the state governments.
Right. I'm just, with inflation and everything else going on, I didn't know
Yeah.
how certain we're going to be about interest rates for the long term.
It's a trailing indicator, but it's indicating that we need to make, and it's really more about the direction you need to be headed in.
Hey, Rob, we're at 6.625 now?
Yeah,
Okay.
we had wanted to go to 6.5
Right.
starting 2 or 3 years ago. We compromised last year by moving from 6.75 to 6, whatever that was, 5
We remember.
with the idea we would get to 6.5 this year.
Yeah. Okay.
And by the time we got there, potential, it went down another quarter.
Move the football.
They keep moving the ball.
That would be a very significant driver.
You know, it is and it isn't. So I knew someone would ask me. I'm sure it was Matt. It was my last email to Amy before this afternoon.
I mean, I know we've looked at them all in the
Yeah, but if
past.
you look at the difference, hope everybody was hoping or they're expecting that we would go to 6.5 this year. The difference between 6.5 and 6.25 combined is about $400,000. So not an insignificant amount of money, Matt, but it's not 4 million or $1 million.
Right.
I mean, it's attainable. But I think it's important. It'd be a big topic for you guys to talk about.
Yes.
If you looked at the 20-year continuum past, Kevin, how low has it been ever?
I don't have that. I don't know.
Is it ever cracked the 5s?
Ours?
Ours? No.
No.
Okay,
This is the lowest it's ever been.
Yeah.
so that's something to benchmark up on as well. so-
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But some of our returns have been in the 5s.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the other things we target is the reserve level. Reserve is for a rainy day, snowy day. But we talked about the health plan, very important that we've been able to get that back on track. Capital, always need capital. Places to put, there's always needs for projects every year. Extensive prioritization of capital projects is done, and some are funded and some aren't. There's always a need. And we try to put extra money in there when we have the opportunity to do that. And then other is my favorite category for everything. What's in that? Other?
Well, Culture Parks and Recs has a reserve, sewer has a reserve, there are multiple little funds, and Amy can list the 700 of
Lots
them
of
for you.
So again, it's just like the salaries on the expense side or the elephant in the room, taxes are the elephant in the revenue room. That's where we always go to get the money we need at the end because all the rest of it is fairly finite. So that's the calculus we do at the end of this process. How much, what's the target reserves, what's the pension fund assumptions? How much do we have to charge to go back to the very first thing I said, which it has to be a balance. Good to see everybody's thinking about this, and I'm sorry. And a lot of work to do. What's qualified, what's not. Let's be as creative as we can, but suggest we take them along. But there are some opportunities in the priorities that both boards, Maria and Matt, talked about.
Is the 7.5 million the same window as the school gets, like a 2-year window, or?
Yeah, we did it until 2024.
Can anybody tell me,
There are people here.
I'm just curious as to the huge gap between, can you go back to that slide? The town funding and the school funding?
So there is, the town funding came through the state and the school funding came through the Department of Education. The school's funding was actually a little over $1 million, but as Matt stated earlier, part of that was used for last year's budget loss, and then some of it was used for their summer program to get the kiddos caught up.
So there's no overlap at all?
But we can use our
You
seven
can
and a half.
use the town money for education if we wanted to. There are certain.
Right, that's right.
And ours, I think, was figured in the calculus, it was benchmarked against like your Title I funds.
Yeah, so the formula.
So that's how they vary town to town. Maybe free to reduce lunch numbers, your Title I funding.
And I'm not asking you to make sense of why the government has suggested on the programming for ARPA, but I think the ARPA team can help here. But one of the overarching concerns was public health, right? That's why we see water, whatnot. And maybe you already mentioned it, Matt. I apologize, I can't. But any of the fundings you have got, you highlighted mental health concerns and counseling, whatever. So do those cross over at all or not?
So I'd have to look at the specific items. There is like social emotional stuff and getting kids caught up. There's very specific funding under the town ARPA that it can be used for some of the education needs. It's not carte blanche, but there are specific items that can cross over.
So I imagine you guys are.
So Chris, we talked about that. Sean, Wendy, and myself have talked about that under ARPA, and if we do have funding, and if Board of Ed uses their funding and they still need more to catch kids up or for whatever use, if we can do that, that's the goal.
Yeah, because it's defined as to offset the negative impacts of the pandemic, so that should fall into the
But I'm not even
bucket.
talking about catch kids up. If we're identifying additional emotional.
Social work support, things of that nature.
I mean, I can see it in my own family manifest that didn't exist a year ago. So I'm not just catch up. I'm saying if these are additional concerns that are arising, it wouldn't be a catch up. It would be applying them to the new ones that are.
If we're allowed.
We're waiting for the final rule in January. At the convention yesterday, there was a lot of discussion from across the municipalities about how they're going to use that. And some of the recommendations, unless you have an immediate need, you might want to wait till the final rule. And there may be, like with mass numbers of people wanting to do something, you may be able to do it more easily, just to make sure you include your finance and your legal team in what you do. Kind of that was the message.
It's also going to be interesting how we coordinate this, because my understanding, and you're right, is the Board of Selectmen is the one that authorizes the expenditures for the 7.5, and how do we coordinate that with the budget and the timing, because we're not going slow intentionally, but we're also not in a race to just spend this without thinking it through and making sure that we allocate it in the right place. So it's not necessarily going to line up with a February, March, April. I think some of it will, and we'll be able to look for that, but I don't want anybody to leave here thinking we have 7.5 to offset budgetary expenditures in the current year or the subsequent year.
That's a good point.
And the other point, just to add on to what Sean said, is the capital could tie in somewhere with the budget, because if there's places we can use the money for capital across both,
Right.
Right.
that could help us.
Thanks, Chris. I think these are, again, motherhood and apple pie, but I think these are things that we all should think about, when we look at any reasonable expense. Is it in fact reasonable? Is it affordable? Have we looked at all of the alternatives? Is this the best among those? And are we giving everybody a chance to understand what it is, to evaluate it, the public and the voters? So I think we do that. So we wanted to share, just to remind people of a couple of current town policies. These will be part of how we think about the budget on the Board of Finance. General reserves at 15.5%. Already had some questions. We used to be at 12, yes. But this was another push to move this up, and we sort of, as a board, looked at somewhere between 15 and 17, and we settled at 15.5%. So that's our target.
Which was really driven by our bond council to make sure that we maintain the AAA bond rating.
So they're looking at best practices for the AAA rated towns, and this was their strong suggestion.
Also, we use GFOA, and their recommendation is 2 months of reserves, so just like a family.
Didn't make these numbers up. We use
Yeah.
the benchmarks from the people that influence both the bond rating and how the town rank towns by their financial performance. Debt service is targeted at 7%. We actually changed that from a cap last year. A policy changed to target of 7 with a cap of 8%. And that was to allow for the projected borrowings for Latimer Lane. And we will be at that level when the second bond issuance for Latimer Lane is made.
The chart's coming up, I don't remember offhand.
So, that's very important to us. Health reserves at 20 to 25% of expected claims. Again, we're doing well in that regard. Pension OPEB Suntory, we talked about this, 6.25. The other is that we use a tax collection rate at 98.5%. This has a little bit of a cushion, order of magnitude of about $500,000 from what we have historically collected. So we think that's the only real sort of contingency that we have in our budget and the way we analyze this. We've used it for years. We're comfortable doing it, but again, the bond councils, rating agencies are comfortable with this approach.
If folks think back to Governor Malloy, and when he was talking about cutting $400,000 to our budgets, that's where that comes in. Or when we had our assumption on investment returns, that came in way under. So that's the cushion that the board uses, and it's in a $105 million budget. It's actually a very small number. And as Rob said, we do this upon the recommendation of our bond counsel, who likes us to use conservative budgeting numbers.
So one of the other things we wanted to share is sort of how our town compares to our neighboring towns. A little bit of an eye chart, but the median taxes, has some taxes on a median priced home in Simsbury, just under $9,000. And we also did based on $350,000. So when you compare towns, the median price of a house in some of the other towns are higher or lower. So the comparison changes a little bit. But we are actually $177 cheaper than Avon.
Our median.
On our median, but we're $1,000 more expensive on a $350,000 house. All right. And then you can see that relative to some of our surrounding towns, Farmington, of course, has a great mill rate and a big industrial base, but nonetheless, it's something that can get compared to. So when you're thinking about an increase in taxes, just remember that whatever we come up with in an increase in our tax rate will be additive to this competitive advantage or disadvantage. All right. just sort of give you order of magnitude of what a tax increase from our current mill rate of 38.63 will mean on a per household basis, based on the houses for 350, 450, or 550. And so if we're thinking about, we're going to ask the boards to give us a sense of where you think your constituents will be comfortable if we need to raise taxes. Somewhere on this chart, people will say, sure, I pay this much. But, oh my God, I wouldn't pay that much. So
It's a perpetual number.
What's that?
It's perpetual, so it continues. It's not up 1% this year.
it's built, it actually is worse than that. It's built on every year.
Right. Well, I get it.
It's compounded.
Yeah, so to go back to that
Yeah,
slide. So one of the things when I was talking with someone, I said, would you pay 2% more at 350? And I was like, yes. So then in 5 years, you're going to be paying 1,000 more in taxes than you are right now. And the reaction was, I have to move. That was one person's reaction. Another person was like, and I had a long conversation with Lydia about this, some of our seniors are really feeling that pull. So maybe you can afford $200,000 this year, but can you afford it every year for the next 5 years? And one of the things that's really going to be driving us is debt service. We went from 6.5, really, what we were paying, we're going to go up to 8. And on 105 million, that's almost $1.5 million increase in debt service. So that's why debt service matters, because that's going to go up. It's going to put pressure on everyone else's budget to stay flat when that hits. And that's coming not this year. This year we have a repeat, but next year it's a big hit. So that's something to think about, these numbers and how we're going to do that, which is why Matt's pointed out using grants to the best effect. It's not a big number, but anything we can do to suppress that lowers the mill rate increase. And so we're very focused and appreciate the people working on the ARPA group, Wendy, Becky, and Sean in particular, and of course all the staff that's supporting them from both boards, because that's going to be a lever hopefully we'll be able to use even given those limitations.
So one of the other big drivers is, the taxes are driven off the grant list. I have to say these numbers have been moving around a lot. We don't know the final numbers. That's why it's really difficult to give a firm expense target or increase. But this will ultimately come out in the during the budget process as we get this final number. But there are also projected increases, decreases, sort of flat grant list growth going forward. Again, it's hard to predict this based on buildings and projects that are in the. It's important though, because we need to make decisions for this year's budget, but also make capital decisions for the 5 to 10 year time frame. And understanding where the grand list will be, could be, and when the timing of major projects will be, is a daunting and challenging task that we need to be working on all this.
And to Rob's point, one of the things we as a board try to work on is planning our debt. So if we know we're going to have a big boost in debt service, if we can, we want to time it so it's in the year when we have a big grant list growth, not in the year when we have negative grant list growth, which is why these 5-year projections are so important. And to Rob's point, it's been hard because we don't have staff and resources to get very accurate projections. Now on the next slide, you can see the forward going. And you can see that there's going to be some challenges. We expect the 0.25% to go up, but we don't know what that's going to be. But you'll see going ahead, some of that grant list projection is going to make our lives very difficult.
So the asterisks are also important because these are revaluation years that sort of resets everything, positive or negative. You know, from the last reval, that it was very different depending on where your home was priced and taxed before or after. If you were at the higher end of the scale, it actually benefited you. If you were at the lower end of the scale, you got slammed. So these things are very hard to predict going forward, but we have to do the best we can with it. So this, a great slide, hard to understand, really hard to follow, because you've got revals, you've got changes in mill rates, changes in the vehicle price of homes. But I think the takeaway from this should be we do as good a job as we can, and I think we've done a pretty good job trying to match tax increases with sort of the changing things in town. It wasn't that long ago that we had to deal with the Hartford meeting. Turned out to be not that big a deal. It was scary as hell for about a year and a half. Basically, a big cliff in property taxes. So planning for those kinds of things is important. This is interesting. This is the cost per resident for the town's operating budget. So this is plowing, all the others, the police, right? Everything outside the board.
Just in putting this together, we use Serve Town Profiles 2021, and so one of the challenges we have is the information that is publicly published is often old by the time we see it, even though it's 2021 numbers. The numbers are in the back, and so we, did reach out to Amy and reach out to Matt and Maria as we go forward with the budget. If you have more accurate numbers, let us know, for heaven's sakes, but these are just the published numbers that are out there. That's what our bond council uses. And it's an interesting point in time to look at.
Yeah. Is that not?
No,
the fire is a separate district. You get to know this. They tax separately, and they spend separately the whole town. Right? That's a big difference.
And there's no projected population growth in the next year? It's a flat number?
I don't think we have a projector, right? Flat growth for population in this area.
Now it's carried over. We don't have projections.
So with education, that's been going up. The student price goes down and the budget goes up.
Well, part of that is, as Matt explained, there are fixed costs associated with schools. You have the same number of schools, same number of lights, same number of electricity, same number of utilities, and also the same number of teachers.
And to Chris's question of the sort of mix of how the cost more because of the mix of the students that are in special programs. That's what's good. All right, this is everybody's favorite slide. But this reiterates what we talked about a few minutes ago. The yellow line is the 8% cap line that we had to raise to fund the Lattimer Lane, which is this issuance right here. These are future bond issuances in subsequent years for capital projects that are not yet, they're identified, but they're not prioritized. Those are placeholders. Placeholders, yes. And so, there's a lot of capacity in the out years. But the next big project that goes on here that has bars like these will push us right back up to the end. So that's the challenge. Right? Okay. What do they do? How does this one different from the previous one? Play removed. Oh, we took out the subsequent one. Just to say this is not to say we can't do anything else ever again. It's to say that it has to fit within these lines.
And the other point we were trying to make is the prior slide is not what has to be. You have your decision makers and what comes next and how much you want to pay. And if you think you have needs in your operating budget, do you want to use those allocation of resources towards debt service? And that's something we all, as we decide how to efficiently allocate our resources, what do you want to prioritize? But we did want to sort of highlight that because debt service is going to be a huge driver next year. We should all start thinking about that and for the next 2 years. So as to how we're going to manage that collectively with our taxpayers.
So collectively, on the line of thinking of, we're all going to be told on 1%, 2%, $283, are we taking wage increases into account? Are we taking COLA into account? Are we going, as the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education, into that analysis, or are you guys going to do that? Because looking at the taxes is only one piece of what people pay, and if you assume it's 1%, but nobody makes $1 more in the future years, it's not the right way to make the argument, I guess is what I'm saying, because wages do go up over time potentially for families, as do other things. So how do you want us to look at that when we're asked what's tolerable from a 1, 2,
Well, I think I'll answer and then let Lisa chime in. You do the best you can for the 1 year operating, Sean. I don't think we can do any better than that. I think that there is enormous pressure for wage increases especially at lower level jobs with the 15 going to $18 minimum wage and signing bonuses to work for Uber or Amazon and all the rest. We are not immune from that.
Yeah.
But we don't know what the full impact will be, and we have to presume that if we have an inflation rate, that other things will be inflated too, like housing prices and commercial, that might help us in that. So I don't think we should spend too much time beyond the 1 year budget.
Okay, I guess I'm just trying, because, we often talk a lot about COLA here, and Lisa and I always debate the seniors. I mean, they're getting, what, 6.9?
No, 5.9. But inflation is 6.2.
I understand, but we've never taken inflation out or in the prior years when we talk about this. So I'm trying to understand, and nobody's coming in with a 6% increase, obviously, on the budget side.
Any more than we held with the 1.5 when it was at our
Right.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think the way we always take inflation into, that CPI is one measure of inflation. So we always do look at inflation, but I guess we would say to you, this was a good year, you all door knocked. How did people feel? Do you think 200 is a reasonable, 200 to 400, 200 to 500 more in taxes each year for the next 4 years? Is that reasonable?
I guess that's what I'm saying, Lisa, is there's 50 other factors when you take that into account. And I guess I always thought that was the role of the Board of Finance to evaluate that versus the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education. So I just want to know how far you want our analysis to go.
Yeah, so I guess what we were trying to do this year is to just highlight the things we're looking at. Because we didn't want to come in with a hard number that you guys ignore without the information. Like, we don't know what the grand list is. We're not going to know the grand list. The grand list has changed from April just to this month's prediction. So that's one of the challenges we have as a board.
Yep.
I think you all have a sense, having door knocked, what are you comfortable telling your residents? Yeah, we're going to ask you to pay 200 more a year in taxes, or no, we really need you to pay 600 more a year in taxes for the next years. And then we have to say to you, okay, that's not just the increment this year. You're already paying a lot more taxes than Farmington, Avon, all of our neighbors that we saw that. So this 200 is above the gap that we're already at. And then the question, Lydia and I had a long conversation about this, is, we live in Simsbury and we're willing to pay a premium to live here because we care about our schools, our trails, our beautiful downtown. We've got great staff, everything, we do it. And so $200 more a year might not be enough to cause someone to leave.
Yep.
But 200 above 2,200 might become a barrier for a new business coming in or someone to move in who's looking for comparable homes. So the question is, there are two things we're thinking about, is the incremental increase for the 1 year, and then how are we situated competitively? Because you don't want to get into a spiral where our taxes are so high, we discourage new businesses coming in, but for abatements, which are really unfair to current businesses. And to the extent that home prices are rising now, that's great for the bottom line, but that money is not liquid. Those are in people's homes. A senior whose house has increased, that happened to my mom. Her house increased in value, and she's like, that doesn't help me. I still don't have money to pay my bills. So those are the challenges. And, and then the question is, fundamentally, I've had this conversation with Chris, what kind of community do we want to be? Are we an education community? We're here when our kids are at school, and we're willing to pay extra, and then we leave when our kids graduate? Or are we a whole community where we welcome, I don't want to say everybody is welcome, but where we encourage young families to come in who can barely make their mortgage payments, and seniors to stay who can barely make their payments. You know, what kind of a community do we want? And I've heard from, you know, there are reasonable ways to look at that, and I don't know what everyone's position on it, but those are the things we're thinking about. I would be interested in sort of just hearing off the top of your heads, what is a reasonable tax increase that you guys are comfortable telling your constituents?
So a whole bunch of stuff right there. So hold on. You guys know me, my mind's swirling. So we've had spirited debates, Lisa. I'm challenged by the word competitive, as we're using competitive as we talk about other towns, because until we have a net loss of citizens, I don't know that people are moving into town with the understanding that the cost is what the cost is. So until that occurs to me, I don't know that using the word competitive as far as benchmarking off of what is really appropriate. I'm just going to get that out there for everybody.
So we can agree to disagree on that.
Correct. I mean, because I don't know why we're talking about why we look at Farmington to be a competitor to us. To me, it's an empty comparison because we will never have the commercial base that they have. So just stop talking. I mean, to me, I would never bring that up. Maybe a couple beers I would, but after that, initially I would not talk about it, okay? I do have a question relative to the grand list. And this is educational, how do we look at out-year grand list? How do we project out-year grand list growth? Is there some metric of just assumed business development, or is it only the reevaluation and evaluation of our housing stock?
So Francine takes what she knows about from the planning department, so all the permits that are coming in, she'll talk to Mike about the projects that are coming up, and then she just does her best estimate as to when she thinks the completion date is going to be, what the market value is going to be, and then that's what she adds to her list over the course of the years. But as far as grand list growth in the out years, obviously it's more difficult. Like we saw this year, she had stuff in the out years and ended up coming in during this year because projects were moving faster. And now, because of labor shortages and material shortages, now projects are moving slower. So she's probably going to be off again this year, if I were to guess. I don't know. And then for the fiscal year 23 budget, we have accurate information by the time we get to the spring because she has to file her grand list. But the out years, they're still they're so unknown. She only does her projections for the out years once a year, and that's only for tri-board.
So is the simplest, it's an area of perfect science. Okay, and then the median house value, is that a function, is it divided into something like the grand list or not?
I mean, it's correlated because the grand list includes all of the houses, but the median house price is the assessed.
I mean, if you take out the commercial property, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Then you take whatever the
Yes.
residential value is, and you tell how many housing units, and then that's the number, okay. So, is there any value or possible, Lisa, your question about what's acceptable for tax rate? That grid I think is telling, this is what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. So if the Board of, we've got 10 years of fixed known increases in every department. Okay, Matt knows exactly what his year-over-year increases for everything he has. You got salaries, all your fixed cost, maintenance, electricity, all that stuff. Same thing with the town. We know every single year what it's going to be, or has going to be. So if we took those fixed numbers and we continue, and we determine some average year over year, and we continue to compound each of those out over 10 years, and the Board of Selectmen, conversely, the Board of Selectmen spent no more money on anything. We froze our spending and applied it to that 10-year grand list, which at some point starts to dip down, right? Then we are going to know what it's going to be for that, whatever the housing stock represented in that number is, what the annual increase year over year is going to be from today to then for people, just for those fixed increased costs, correct?
So we actually have done that. So we've begun the modeling process, and I want to congratulate Amy because we have spent the last 2 years working on a model.
So we've never looked at things that way?
We do. We look at that all the time, and she actually has a budget modeling program where we project exactly what you said. What are the fixed costs? What do we, and CAFR sort of actually has assumptions baked in as what to assume for a salary and benefit increases. There are industry standards, like health is usually 6 to 9. And so we do have an out-year projection. We're trying to refine that model, but that's one of the things we look at regularly, and we'll have that hopefully in the next few months to share that. But I don't know if you have it there, if you could just put up an old one so that folks can see what it's like. And we can.
I think the data is good enough. All right, but to a certain extent, we actually do know what the annual increase to the mill rate is going to the tax is going to be based upon those numbers.
Well, we don't know exactly because.
Well, none of this is exact.
But we have a projection, and that's what
You're getting into long-range planning more so than I think what Rob's question is.
Yeah, so
On the one year, right?
we could go down in a rabbit hole here a little bit. But it would not be wrong to think about a 2% increase year over year in the taxes.
To maintain our fixed costs with no average increases each year with no additional Board of Selectmen spending.
Well, when you say no additional expenditure,
Projects
but
improvement.
growing similarly to the 2% increase in taxes.
Correct.
Is that fair enough?
Fair enough.
And that could or may not be offset by an increase in the grant list. What's sort of weird about this formula where we look today is that the grant list is not expected to grow 2% a year, but our expenses and operating expenses are going to grow at least 2% a year. In fact, they're almost always 3% a year.
Right.
This is not a repeatable, sustainable business model.
Yep.
Right? So the way we make it work is if the grant list goes up, and then we make up the difference by raising taxes. That's back to the slide that was earlier in the step. So the question, and then you stop, and you reval all of the properties and even the playing field. The mill rate comes down, the taxes still go up. Right, because a reval doesn't lower your taxes, it just reallocates some of the pays. So we either have to get a lot bigger, commercial growth, residential, grow the grand list dramatically, more people come to town, all of those things that most people, a lot of people don't like, don't want to do. Or we balance it the way we've been doing it, which is to raise taxes as small, as incrementally as we can, and encourage development.
Well, and I think, yeah, so we should encourage, I think it's an honest conversation that I start having with people, not that any guys are, but when I talk to residents, you think about commercial development. We're never going to have commercial development again as far as I can see, in the conventional thinking that people think about commercial. There's not going to be Amazon built, not that that's a value to us, but we're running out of land. And there are very few sizable portions for meaningful, impactful, large-scale commercial development.
Yes.
So that is, we just took one out too. What's that?
We just took a flood.
I get that, we take that for certain. Okay, so I mean, we will continue to, I think we have to continue to be honest with our residents to say that residential real estate is really going to, we know it's going to stop. It's not, right? So is there really an honest way for us to recoup any additional costs outside of residential real estate? We have to have that honest conversation with. Unless we adjust our spending, the way we run this town from a financial perspective.
We do have an opportunity for a new tax street, albeit it's small. Is there is finally a state legislative additional tax stream if the community wants it in the marijuana dollars at some point. And we've been, again, not suggesting we did that debate tonight, but we've all bemoaned the fact that we basically have one way to raise revenue in this community, and there's potentially a new one down the road, it's small. So there are changes coming down the road there. But Robin, at least to answer your question, I mean, 3%, 2.5%, quarter point budgeting here or there, we'll call it 1.75 on the grand list, maybe 2 if we get lucky. The debt service is fine, going on a 1 to 1.5% tax increase.
So that's a comfort level for you?
No, I'm saying that's the reality. That's basically where we're going to be in April after we're all done spending 2,000 hours on this. Given an eighth of a point here or a quarter point there, that's where we're going to be. It's somewhere between probably 0.75 and 1.5% tax increase. and then we send it to the voters for validation. So I think our job.
So from your lips to God's ears, I hope you're right, Sean. I have to tell you that, if you take the budgets that Amy put up for both the town and for Board of Ed, you take the things that we, my policy, want to do, and you run that through the mill rate calculator, it's about a 2.5% to 2.8% increase in the mill rate.
If you go all the way to 6.25, you mean on the pension side?
What's that?
The pension side going all the way to 6.25?
6.25.
Yeah, yeah, right, so that's another half
Yeah.
point. You're right.
So.
Without pulling on any of the levers we talked
Without
about,
pulling
right?
on any.
Without looking at reserves, without looking
Yeah.
at grants, without looking at.
Right,
Okay.
right. So that, now, thank you, Matt, because that.
'Cause that's what we always do in the end, right?
So that's a good tee up to what I was gonna sort of, I know some people have questions, Linda and others, but I'm gonna sit down and just say, there are two things I wanna say. First of all, so secret that these slides, Lisa did a great deal of the work, and Amy, if you don't know, is a gem. She is an unbelievable workhorse. And so I'm thanking you for everything you've done.
Thank you.
The last thing that to conclude is, we all need to look at the budgeting process with those sort of priorities I have in mind. Be open to things that would be more efficient. Be open to where you might be able to rearrange expenditures. I always come back to schools, you've got a mismatch. I'm not telling you anything you guys don't know, but you have a mismatch between some of the schools' class sizes and kids growing as squadron.
Yeah.
We're going to have to touch a few things that aren't comfortable. Redistricting schools, voting zones, and I've had some really good conversations about this over the years. We have to be open to those things. And in the end, we will do exactly what Sean said. We'll go back and forth on budgets. See if I got this right. We'll say, could we do this? How about this? Don't budget every vacancy from the first day of the fiscal year because you know you won't have that fiscal year. All of those things on the edge, and then we'll come up with a mill rate, and the tax rate, and the reserve assumption, and we'll come up with that. But it really is incumbent on everybody to try to do the best you can, to find places where we can save, be smart about what we do, and think.
I'll just add one benchmark. When I asked the question, what are you comfortable with a tax increase percentage, only Sean answered in that room, so that tells us something. If you look at New York and Massachusetts, they actually put caps on the municipalities' rates. New York is a 2% municipal tax increase, and that includes grand list growth. So obviously you can increase spending if you've got a good grand list, when the grand list is low. Massachusetts is 2.5. We know that Michigan has introduced and is likely to introduce something similar for Connecticut. So that's something we'll be watching as that goes forward. I don't know what Lake has. But in terms of what is a reasonable amount, I don't know what we all think in this room, but we know what Massachusetts and New York thought. So that's, and talking with all of you individually, the sense I got from most people is that they're comfortable with a 2 to 2.5% tax increase sometimes. We try not to do it every year. But anything higher than that, those numbers asking your residents to pay $300, $400 more in taxes every year becomes hard. And I do, Chris and I will always disagree on many things, but one, I think it is important to look at what our competitive towns are. Because we always ask, am I getting good value for the money I'm spending? And can I get that same value somewhere else for less? Or am I going to move because of the difference, or am I not going to move in because of the difference? So those are things we think about as to how heavily you weigh them. I don't know. But that's my 2 cents.
So I'll answer that. Personally, I think what I think that is that the taxes should increase is immaterial. Until we adjust our spending strategically, then the taxes have to increase to meet the the expenditures that we've laid in front of us. So what I think is whether it's 1 or 4, I'm sorry, who falls in, it doesn't matter. We have an obligation to meet until we correct, and we've had many healthy and positive conversations around what are the ways that we change our spending habits? What are the strategies that we all do? But until we do those, our liabilities to a certain extent are known. So whatever that, those we have to, when the bill comes in, somebody's got to pay it. Otherwise, the lights get turned off.
Well, or you change your priorities. I mean, one of the things the pandemic did, I think, in all of our lives, was we really looked at what do we need, right? When that happened, we were in our houses, and what did we really spend? What did we need? You sort of got the opportunity to see what are the core things. And this, but in some ways, was a window into zero-based budgeting. Start with what do you need, and then build from that, and not just assume that we're going to go on the same level. So I don't know if you guys have given any thought to that, whether that's something you guys would consider doing.
Well, to add to your point, we were $1 million under budget this year, right? There seems to be some room in the budget that we ended up using for year-end savings. So going into the budget, in the past, we've said, let's keep services the same, right? Because we don't want to take anything away, but are there any services that no one would technically miss if we cut back on some things?
That only works when you don't have full employment. Once you get to full staffing, that gimmick doesn't work. So you have to be really careful when you mess with replacement.
But people have talked about vacancy rates.
That's what I'm saying, though. When it's in a labor shortage, it's easy to do that. When labor is good and you need those police officers, you need to be really careful with not budgeting for that, because then you miss $1 million on the other side. And then we have to go ask mom and dad for another check at the end of the year. So I agree we need to look at it, but we need to, much like the tax collection rate, we need to be very careful that we're going to start messing with vacancy rates and everything else, and make sure that we have full buy-in from both boards, that we're going to do it together.
Well, that's one thing that Chris brought up last year. You asked for staffing projections across
every department.
Right. So we've seen
Because
one
every
potential.
year we see one pop.
Yeah.
Like, well,
Yeah.
what-
So that might be something to add as a change or to the plate, because we see it from one of the groups that's in the room with us, but we haven't seen it for other departments. So just wanted to mention that.
I feel like we kind of started out with, saying, okay, let's go through the boards and talk about what our priorities are. And we've done that, and then we kind of screamed past everything else to the end and said, okay, but here's what you can't do, you can't do. I just want to remind people that, we start out with the priorities, and, the reason I didn't answer when you asked about what is a reasonable increase is that from my role on the board perspective, I'm starting with what I think the district needs, and that's our starting point. These weren't budgets that we presented.
Correct.
These are our starting points, and
Exactly.
we keep reporting, pulling it, but those aren't the budgets.
Right.
Those are just kind of our first view of fixed costs. But I just want to remind you, we start with our priorities, and then the negotiation and the discussions and all the analysis comes at the end. So I don't want to miss the beginning, have people forget about the beginning part of the meetings, because now I feel like we're talking about, okay, well, how much is it, and we're not getting the guidance, I understand, but I feel like we're kind of getting guidance.
Well, it's just like sort of a family, in a family, you decide what do you want to spend for this year, what are the priorities, we need a new roof, we need to fix the car, we want to go on vacation, and then we look at the revenue. Well, how much did we earn this year? Oh, dad got laid off, or mom got laid off, or so-and-so got a good raise, yes, we can afford. That's what we do all the time. And so I think we're just sort of thinking about it. The needs are all there, and we always have more needs than we can pay for. And so how do we do it? And we all like to get to a place where we're all comfortable, I think is what we're saying. But our job at the Board of Finance, at the end of the day, we have to submit a budget to the voters. And so there's a number associated with that. And we know that it's not now, and we'll look at all the needs, and you come in and say, no, this is really important. We have to do this for the health and safety, and we say, okay, can you do it with grant money? No. All right. Are we willing to put this to the voter? And so that's the conversation we have. If you're right, it's the start of a discussion. It's not the end, for sure.
And for us, it's so early in the process that we haven't even been able to go through what our priorities fully are for this year.
Exactly.
And we need to hear more about all of that information before we can say, what are we willing to ask the taxpayers? Because I need to know what I'm asking them to pay for. And I don't know what I'm asking them to pay for right now, because we're just starting the process.
And that's an excellent point, because at the end of the day, we have to justify why we're asking them to reach into their pockets.
Right.
We don't generate a profit. Anything we spend is coming out of my pocket or your pocket. And we have to say, no, we need you to take this money out of your pocket, and here's why. And here's the analysis we've done. And we know that. And I think the point we were all trying to make is we're open to hearing that conversation. We do all having door knocks, do have a sense of what the number is that people have told us they're willing to pay for an increase in taxes, but that's in a vacuum to Susan's point. They might be willing to pay it if they need this, and this. So those are the calculations we're going to have together. One thing we've heard is, you're sitting on almost $8 million in ARPA money. Why are you raising taxes at all? And so if we are getting a tax increase with the ARPA, we'll have to understand, all of us, how to communicate that. And the reason why some of the ARPA spending is limited. So it may be that does happen this year.
Let's make that very clear. The ARPA spending is very limited right now. The guidance is very limited.
Right.
So we cannot rely on that. Is that fair?
Right, and if we whiff, as you cautioned us and you were right, we have to pay it back, and the taxpayers will be the ones that have to pay it back. So we need to be 100% right when we spend that money.
Yeah.
So, but my only point is it's going to be a communication challenge for all of us, not for any one person.
No,
and
great.
as we deal with that.
By the way, I got yelled at for masks at doors, not taxes.
Your mask over your mask. Thank you.
One of the things that dynamics that I'd like to improve upon, and I'm not in any way pre-volunteering for a worker. But one of the, this room is built primarily of either volunteers or overtaxed municipal stewards of municipal stewards. So I appreciate that. But we often get into this meeting, and we're at the end of the process versus starting at the evolutionary at the start of the process. And I know that Lisa is a leader of this thought, and it's going to take, and as Rob as well, I think to me it's going to take getting people to make difficult decisions with bold statements, and instead of a very BS political statement there. But we need to think about we never talk strategically. We kind of got to zero in on that, and I fault myself for taking it to a certain extent where we are, because we never talk, as three boards or two boards about how do we evolve and stop spending, and how do we make decisions around the benefits that our employees are given. I'm not listening, you guys are employees, but the cost of benefits and the changes to the benefit structure that may need to exist in the future for retirements, and or the concept of additional shared services. What I mean is we don't put work groups in ahead of time to start fleshing those concepts out. So that is by no fault of anyone's here, because we're all compassionate, dedicated folks who have so many other responsibilities to follow through on. But I think that we have found ourselves quite often at the end of the budget process talking about the same kinds of things, like are we going to go to 5 hours on the library on Sundays to save $30,000? And I've heard that 5 years in a row now. And it's like, my gosh, is that where we're at? Is that how we get to our budgets? Or do we make bigger systemic changes through policy changes moving forward?
I think that's an excellent point. I think Rob gave a great suggestion a couple months ago about maybe hiring resources to help us do long-term planning and look at how we're projecting so that we can time our debt and time our additions of staff to coincide with the rail list growth. But another thing, to your point, and I just want to recognize again staff's work. We know you're overworked, and we know that you're under-resourced. So is there a resource that would be helpful to do some of this work? I know that there are groups that do this. Schools do this all the time, and we could bring in, so that would be something for the Board of Selectmen to consider in their budget if you think there's a value to that, or if you think that staff just doesn't have the time to do that. So that's just, again, resource management.
I think it's twofold, too. Chris's point, getting ahead of it a little bit, but I also don't think we do a very effective job because we're so focused on the end game of when we do pull a lever like that and make a move, we don't give it a second thought. So we went to a model between the town and the Board of Ed on a shared finance director that was talked about for 100 years, and we spent half a second acknowledging it. So it's an arrangement that's worked out wonderfully. It supports both places, and we're building on. So I'm with you, Chris, 100% of the time. I think we need to get ahead of it, but we're so end game focused that when we do something, we never go back and acknowledge it because we're out to that.
We acknowledge it every time we do your budget review. Amy mentions it every time, so it does get acknowledged.
No, I mean, as a community, and I don't mean here, as a community and the things we're trying to do to lower costs. I think we could be more effective in how we message this.
I think when Chris chairs the strategic expense review.
He's taking way too much airtime not to step up and run this.
No, when you show up late, you cannot participate. That's my goal. That's my motto.
Serving on the topic, but again, I'll say the same thing I say every year. We are constrained by state statute and state law in so many ways, and I'm not throwing up my hands.
Yeah.
But remember, because so much of our budget is tied to salaries, which is tied to bargaining arbitration, which is tied to unions, there is only so much we can do to truly control costs that are non-labor based. There's not much left at the end of the day, because so much of our expenditures are nearly fixed on an annual basis, even if we do a phenomenal job negotiating, even if we trim benefits, which we have, because as you know, we worked hard to do on the Board of Selectmen, and Maria and team has done. When you're in an environment where you're starting at 2.25 with the union, and that's the lowest you're possibly going to go, until we change the structure of the state and how we negotiate with our employees, there is an unfortunate reality of Chris's. It's always going to go up, no matter how strategic we get.
I think that's probably what Chris is getting at, is stuff like regionalization. I don't know if there are other ideas, Chris, but and that's been talked about for years also. You know, yes, you're absolutely right. You're not going to, negotiate wage decreases, but can you do a lean process improvement or something to reduce the number of people, reduce the number of steps in a process, to regionalize something? I mean, are there infrastructural changes that take a lot of effort and time and investment of resources? And that's always the difficult thing, because you're trying to do your job while you're also spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make it more efficient, and nobody's got that time.
Yep.
But that's what, I think we're asking, is there an opportunity there? I don't know the answer to that, but.
Yeah, we've done it a couple of times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have the building department.
And I think the finance department was a good example of that, but are there inter-town things, and the state government actually has programs to incentivize that sort of stuff, or at least they did.
And Matt actually has on his website, which I'm sure everybody goes to, Town and Board of Ed savings is listed there. But you're right, we don't message that a lot. And there are some savings, and we should actually probably capture what those savings are. We don't assign a numerical value to it, but you could. And then those are the kind of things, I think it's two-pronged. One, it's communicating. If we're going to raise taxes, we need to communicate, to Matt's point, look at what we've done to save money. We are very focused on saving you money and giving you the best value for the least amount of dollars. And we do that, but we are not great at communicating that. And to your credit, it's because you guys are fairly humble, and that's not what you do. But it is helpful to the public to understand that. And so I think we can all work on that collectively to do that. And then are there additional steps we can take? And to do those, do we need resources to help us get there? And those are the kind of things we can at least think about. I don't know, to Linda's point, how successful they'll be, because a lot of those are on the margins. But at some point, if the taxes keep going up, some of our seniors are going to leave. And maybe that's just...
It's not at some point, it already happens.
Yeah, so that's sad. These are people we love and know, right? And that's a sad state of affairs, and a lot of it, to Sean's point, is out of our control. A lot of it is based on how we tax in this state. And, so some things we can't control, but that doesn't make it less sad or less hard when you knock on someone's door and they cry. So that's the thing we're juggling. And I think, we're all committed to doing it together to really, we understand the mental health needs. I've got my whole family is in teaching. and they're pulling their hair out. So it's hard, and we know there's a need there. We've got a need. I think everyone in this room kind of understands that the schools are going to get a little more attention this year because the needs there are greater than we've ever seen. And which is why I really applaud the ARPA subcommittee group willing to use the $7.5 million. When we raised this with the consultant from CCM, he goes, what? Towns would share that ARPA money with the Board of Ed, and our guys were like, absolutely, if that's where the need is. So applaud that sort of collaborative approach, and I think.
Well, it goes back to, we are one community.
Yeah, the best interest of the town.
But that counts.
If we don't support each other, then we all can't talk about our great schools, our great trails, our great whatever. If we don't act as one community, we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
But from his reaction, apparently a lot of towns don't. So I do want to say publicly, congratulations to you all for thinking that way.
No, and to Sue's point, and I want to credit Matt for referencing the shared services, I think, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done in partnering with Matt and his team and the Board of Education, because we've made great strides in the last few years of changing how we do business, particularly in regards to our administrative services. So we're sharing financial management services now. We're one of about 10 communities in the state doing that, right? So we're a leader, and we've been integrating our financial management services. We're sharing risk management services now that we weren't doing previously. We're sharing employee benefits services now that we weren't doing previously. We're sharing energy management. We're sharing more on technology and infrastructure. I think that we have been really getting creative and looking at solutions where we can share together, and really shifting the paradigm of doing things separately and really working together as one community. So I've been incredibly grateful to Matt and the Board of Ed team for coming to the table and working with us to find those creative solutions, to find those efficiencies. And I think it's been working just fantastically, and I think that our community is getting improved services as a result of that. And again, I think we are trying to shift and challenge paradigms, and I really want to credit the Board of Selectmen for supporting supporting the work of the management team to, again, change paradigms around things like our benefit structure. As Sean mentioned, we're very constrained under statute, under MIRA. I think a very good victory for us, and again, to Matt's point, maybe we're too humble and we don't share this enough, but right, we saved recently through arbitration and through pension restructuring on the police pension plan, an estimated $1 million over 15 years. That's nothing to sneeze at. That wasn't easy to do, but we did it and we moved the needle. So again, I think I just wanted to reference that. I think we are really looking for those opportunities, and I really wanted to recognize the Board of Ed for their partnership and working with us on that.
So, I don't know, we've covered quite a bit tonight. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and we all know that. This is the beginning of the process. We'll have several opportunities to meet individually and collectively and move towards these goals. So. Hearing
Motion to adjourn.
Wait, we have some questions. Wait, you're fine. Not yet.
The record.
Lindy, go ahead.
That close.
Well, mine was about a couple
Thank you.
of process improvements that they kind of came up through the process last year, and it impacts the Board of Ed and us. And it was around the capital projects that we were presented. So not all the projects mostly in current year we got them, but in out years did not have descriptions. Matt, I know I asked for that last year. And that potentially if we can get more detail this year in the budget book so that we know what's behind the capital project a little bit more, where there's bonding, grants, and also kind of priority if we're going to have to make any decisions in the 2 to 6 year time frame, or to look at that. I know that doesn't stand as solid, but to look ahead and kind of know what's going to come in those years, that would be helpful. The other thing that was very difficult, and I'm looking out for Heather and Amber, is tracking things from year to year, mostly in the capital project. So last year we pulled out a bunch of, again, in the 2 to 6 year, we pulled out a bunch of things because we could not afford them. They may reappear this year in year 3 or in year 6, and it would be good to know where it came from. It was here and it was pulled out because of whatever. So just to have that as a frame of reference, so when we go into the capital budget, we see what those things are. Because what Sean did this past year in the CNR budget, you would ask to have for each project, what was a grant, what was TAR, what was that, and it just made it much clearer. So if we could do something like that with either a new ask, an old ask, a high priority ask, or something like that. So that's just something, I think it would just make all of our lives easier as we go through the capital. I've had that on paper since April, so I just wanted to make sure that it was brought up here.
Yeah, I think that goes to all of our goals. How are we communicating to the public? And the budget document is a bear. There's no way to get around that, but it is the primary document we use for the public to look at. And is there an opportunity? Yes. I mean, every year, the first time I did it, I did the rainbow budget, as Matt may remember, and that was not successful. It was color-coded, but you try different things. But the idea behind it is you try to, how can we best communicate these difficult financial concepts to the public? That's a big part of our priorities, and I'm sure all of yours, because how do you translate this? What is debt service? What is this 8%? What is reserves? What is the health district? I do want to give some positives that Maria pointed out. One, the health reserves, our target is 20 to 25, and we're really at over 40% reserves. And the reason why that is important to all of you is that can often be used to reduce the healthcare increase. So that is a budget positive for you, and just want to make sure you all were aware of that, because that's a complicated process. And Rob's point about the pension investment assumption, we have been on, Maria put in her slide, you can do it over multi-years. Well, we've actually been doing it over multi-years. We never do it in 1 year, but to Rob's point, and thank you to Amy for doing the calculations, the number isn't that significant. 400,000 sounds like a lot, but in 105 million, that's almost de minimis. So can we do that, and where are we going to go with that? So there are some positives this year that we haven't had. We do anticipate the grand list will go up above 0.25, because it always does, but we don't know where that's going to be, so that could be a positive. So there will be levers to pull. So when we start, to Rob's point, we're starting at almost 2.9 just on today. And if you think about Massachusetts and New York, what their targets are, and where you personally want to get to, because we all have to answer to our constituents, and we're all going to answer differently, so we're going to have different answers. Those are things we can think about. And to Susan's point, what are you getting for this? If we're going to ask people to pay more, what are they getting, and how are we going to communicate that? So those are sort of the major takeaways. But not everyone here spoke today. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken and wants to share something?
Art did.
Well, I was more on the final note that excellent meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And Lisa said earlier on that your colleagues have gotten together and have given you guys pens, which recognize all the work that you've done. I have been at 2 years' worth of meetings. They've been conducted professionally in a bipartisan manner. It's a constructive board that solves problems based on individual contributions. Also in your package is a bottle of ink. And while we thank you for all the work you've done, that ink is yet to be used. And we expect neither of you to disappear, but to continue to serve this town as you have so well. And so while we say thank you for your service, we also say we're looking forward to your constructive involvement in this community in the years to come. Our gratitude is very sincere.
Thank you very much. Means a lot. Kevin?
Motion to adjourn.